Hi, my name is Dr. Mark Mayfield, and I'm excited to show you how to work through the emotions worksheet. I developed this worksheet probably about 4 years ago as I noticed that I had some clients that were really struggling with how to connect to their emotions, not only in their body, but also cognitively. Like, what am I feeling right now and why? And so this is just going to be a practical conversation between you and I as I walk you through this worksheet. And so what I want you to do right now is to make sure that you have the worksheet printed out. And you can go about this a couple different ways. I like to give the option to my client to make the decision of how they're going to fill this out. If you're not an artistic person, that's okay. There's some different ways that you can do it. But as we go through this, I want you to have access to some crayons and some colored pencils and some markers and just a plain pencil and a plain pen. And you'll see why we utilize that just here in a little bit. So go ahead and make sure everything's printed out. Make sure you have access to those utensils. Is that what we call them? I think utensils. Push pause, make sure you have all that, and then come back in just a second and we'll start going through the worksheet together. Okay, so I hope that you have everything ready. I've got my worksheet here. I didn't get the colored pencils and the pens, so I'm not gonna fill it out as we talk through it. I'm just gonna talk you through it as we fill it out. One of the things that you'll probably notice and recognize as you go through this is that we often have a go-to big emotion. Let's say you're in an argument with your spouse and all you could come up with is that I'm just angry. And they ask you to describe that and you're like, oh, I'm just angry. I just am. Like, leave me alone. Well, that doesn't do any good for you. It doesn't do any good for your relationship. And so this is intended to walk you through figuring out what are the nuances of anger. And the reason I chose anger is it's something that's very common in my sessions with my clients, is that that's a pervasive feeling. Usually anger is a secondary emotion that is a conglomeration of a bunch of different emotions, and it's really hard to pinpoint what those emotions are. So on the first page here, you'll see just the instructions. Choose a memory and think about the emotions that you felt in that memory. So maybe it's an argument that you had with your spouse, with your kid. Maybe it's an argument you had with a teacher or a friend or a sibling, and ask yourself, what emotion did you feel? So for the purpose of this exercise, I'm gonna pick anger. And just do this with me. So find a memory that you thought of that was produced anger. Write anger at the top here, just right here at the top. Write anger there. And the next piece is gonna require some creativity. So if you're an artist, I'd encourage you to draw. If you're not, just pick a color and write out the answers to these next questions. So this next page, as you flip over, you see the top, it says smell. And it says, with a color, describe or draw the emotion, what the emotion would smell like. So here's an example. If your word is anger, if you were to smell anger, what would it smell like? One client told me once that when they smelled anger, it smelled like the burning brakes of a big rig going down a mountain. You know, if you remember that, you know that smell, right? It's that burning brake smell. It's like sulfuric and rubbery and gross. That was his example of what anger smelled like. You get the idea? So what would anger smell like to you if you smelled it? Draw it, write it out. The next one is, what would it taste like? So think about if you held anger in your mouth, what would it taste like? And as I'm saying that, you know, my glands are salivating a little bit and I'm starting to taste like a bitterness, not so much like salt water, but like chemically, and I want to spit it out. So think about, for you, what would anger taste like? So at this point, you might be really trying hard to like figure out these senses and trying to sense all these things. And that's good, because so many of us are not connected to our bodies when we talk about emotions. And what this does is it engages the five senses to the point where you almost begin to try new things and to experience this in a different way. That's good. It might feel a little awkward right now, and that's okay. So we just did taste. Next is touch. If you were to hold anger in your hand, what would it feel like? For me, if I think about that, it's like sub-zero temperatures and I'm holding a snowball in my hand without a glove on. Or that moment that you have your deep freezer and you reach in to pull a steak out and like the frozenness of the steak sticks to your hand and you got to peel it off and it hurts and it's cold and it burns. That's what it would feel like to me. What would it feel like to you? You might have noticed that I paused right before I described it to you. I had to think about what that would feel like. I had to put myself in that situation. Now, I've had years of practice of this, but it still takes some time for me to put myself in those situations. And so give yourself some grace if you're struggling to make sense of this or to put yourself in those situations. That's normal. This comes with practice, and that's okay. The next is what would it look like, the visual. If I saw anger walking around the streets, what would it look like? If I saw it represented in a caricature or a scene, what would it look like? I don't know if you've seen the movie Maleficent, but if you remember the wall that surrounds kind of her, I don't know if it's her kingdom or wherever she lives, it got these big vines with huge thorns. And you just know that if you have to climb that wall, you've got to scrape yourself in and get hurt as you go over. To me, that's what anger would look like. But for others, it might look like this big scary guy that's coming at them. It might look like a dark scene from a scary movie. What would it look like to you? And often I find that the visual representation is the easiest for people to find because it takes it out of their body and puts it externally. And that's a good thing. And then finally, if you were to hear anger, what would it sound like? Now I'm going to challenge you not to say your spouse screaming at you, because that's not fair. But what would anger sound like? Screeching of tires, the sound of gunshots, the sound of bombs going off. I don't know. What would anger sound like to you? Now I want to go back real quick and just make sure, and I want you to take stock of this for a second as well, to just go back and review. And obviously I'm going through this really fast. This is going to take time. Maybe you're stuck on smell. Maybe you're stuck on touch. Go back and just spend some time reflecting on what you've written down. And do you need to alter that or change that? Because it needs to be genuine to you, not what you're hearing me say. So again, what does anger smell like, taste like, feel like, look like, or hear? Sound like? Hear like? That sounds weird. Sound like. But we're not done there. So if you look now, and the reason I like this printing this off in not double-sided paper is it gives you a chance then to pull out the feelings wheel. And this is something that Trevor, our producer and one of our counselors, developed with me. I really like this feelings wheel because it takes Paul Ekman's work, the psychologist that consulted on Inside Out. So we've got disgust and scared and mad and glad and sad. Now scared was fear in Inside Out. But again, it takes the primary emotions here and makes them very accessible. These are the ones that we talk about all the time and feel. So what I want you to do now is, so hopefully you've pulled this out. I love it that it's colored. It gives you a chance to kind of see the different aspects of the color, the feelings wheel here. But what you're going to do now, if you see in the bottom here, we've got this idea of primary, secondary, and tertiary emotions. If you look at the feelings wheel, we've got primary in the middle, that small circle in the middle, in that pie. We've got the secondary as the pie goes out, and then the tertiary, big word for just the third, on the outside here as well. And what you're going to do now is not pay attention so much to anger as you are going to pay attention to what you wrote here or drew here. So if I said smell, it smelled like burning brakes. Anger smelled like burning brakes. As I go through here, if I think about burning brakes, what is my primary emotion as I'm sitting in front of burning brakes? I don't know about you. I'm not glad. I'm more disgusted. So I might put disgusted down here. And then if I stay within that pie of the emotional wheel, my secondary emotion might be revulsion or repugnance. Like I don't like the smell of burning brakes. And then I might go to the third and say I'm nauseated. It makes me want to throw up. So now you've got a primary of disgust, a secondary of repugnance, and a tertiary of nauseated. I think you probably see where I'm going here. That this breaks down every single nuanced sense into three tangible emotions that maybe you've never thought before. And you might go back and go, oh man, when I'm angry, like, yeah, I feel disgusted and I feel like I want to throw up. I never thought about that before. What I want you to do, and I'm not going to go through each one with you, you get the idea that now on every sense, every sheet that has a sense on it, you're going to go through and go, what is the primary, secondary, and tertiary emotion of that word picture or that word description? And you're going to go through and do each one of those. So now you're going to go back and look at the 15 different emotions. You have 5 primary, 5 secondary, and 5 tertiary. And I want you to go back and circle which of the primaries is most prevalent, not which one shows up most. You might have disgust 3 times. Maybe it's disgust, but maybe you have scared there and you really connect to scared. Circle that one. Not how many times disgust shows up, but which one you connect with most in the primary, and do that with the secondary and do that with the tertiary. So we are feeling our feelings through feelings, and so you're doing this right. And if you're feeling it in your body, you're even doing this better than most. And that's the whole idea, is we want to connect to your body through your feelings. You following? Okay. And so one of the things then that we do is we go back and under the first sheet here, you have anger. Now I want you to write down the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary emotions that you've connected with the most. And then go back and go, okay, does that best describe my anger? My anger makes me disgusted. It makes me fearful. It makes me whatever the 3 are. And if you are struggling to communicate that with a significant other, a partner, a spouse, a child, a boss, a friend, I wonder if this would help them understand what your anger is trying to communicate. And I hope it helps you understand what your anger is trying to communicate. We tend to use this worksheet only when we're dealing with difficult emotions. And I want to challenge you with that. Have you ever been able to describe hope or joy in a way that really paints a picture for somebody in your life or for yourself? You might just go, you know what, I just had a little blip of joy, but what does that really mean? Or a blip of hope or excitement. So do this with easier emotions as well, because that will help develop your emotional IQ, your emotional intelligence, and your emotional language. Hope this has been helpful, and thanks for joining me.